According to my Uncle Neil, Elmer Crawford, his grandfather, or his mother's father, first worked for David Buick and made wheels and spokes. He was originally a blacksmith from Otisville and was good at working with metal. After Buick, he started to work for a new company called FlintWheel&Axle. Shortly after that, he bought out that business from the original owner and sometime down the line renamed it Flint Wheel and Spring. In the late 1930s, Hubert Pierce came to work for Elmer. Hubert worked for GM, or AKA back in those days, Dort and Durant Motor Company. With Elmer, they ran Flint Wheel and Spring until Elmer passed away. Also, Hubert married Elmer's daughter, Avis, and they had 3 boys, Keith, Neil, and Bruce. My Uncle Bruce took over the business in 1973 when Hubert, his father, passed away. My Grandma Pierce, or Avis, did the bookkeeping, and my Uncle Bruce was the main mechanic. In the more modern years of the business, they worked on springs for cars, or automobiles, till about the 60s, and then they started working on shocks. Yet, they did not limit to just the parts of the wheels, but also did any mechanical work. Also to note that Neil and Keith married my mom's 2 sisters. Neil married Susie, and Keith married Shirley. So the Pierces were not directly related to me by blood. But my older cousins always called Avis Grandma and Bruce their uncle. So naturally, me and my brother followed suit. Whether or not they were blood, Grandma Avis and Uncle Bruce were family, as much as anybody else would be. After my grandma got older and went to assisted living in Saginaw in the late 90s, my uncle got a business partner by the name of Red. Grandma passed away in 1998, unfortunately. Uncle Bruce decided to close up Flint Wheel and Spring in the early 2000s. After that, Red had a moving business there for a while, but not much else has happened since. Also, a sad thing was Aunt Alice, which is Uncle Bruce's wife, died of cancer in the late 90s. In turn, Uncle Bruce got sad and had a heart attack and died in 2005. So nowadays, I go to a place called Good Beans Cafe. It's a coffee house that's across the street from my grandma's. My boyfriend Mark is a comedian and we do open mics there every month. I see my grandma's house from across the street. It feels very painful to me to see it, just sitting there, getting rusty, crumbling, and looking so very sad. There's so much CarriageTown history here that's just going bad. Because I'm doing this for a school assignment, I started to interview businesses around the area to see how I can get this location more notice. As I was taking pictures of Grandma's house and Flint Wheel and Spring, which is the business behind the house, I seemed to have this watcher. He was standing across the street next to Good Beans in front of this big building. So I waved at him and smiled. And he waved back. But he looking concerned, he decided to come across the street to investigate. And I was happy to tell him, this is my grandma's house from a long time ago, and I'm doing something for school about it. He's like, oh, okay. I didn't mean to alarm you or anything, I said. He says, oh, no, it's okay. I bought the building across the street, which is Freeman's Dairy. And that building just happened to be next to Good Beans, which is across the street from my grandma's. I asked him his name, and he said his name is John Mason. He also told me he likes to buy and fix up old buildings, and he was actually thinking about buying my grandma's house and business and fix it up. I said, oh, yes, please do. He said, yes, I really would want to, but sadly, there's a land dispute, and I can't seem to get through the red tape. But I got his email, and I'm going to keep in touch, and I was just very thankful for the time to meet him, to meet someone that wanted to do something with my grandma's house and business. I soon want to visit Jesse Historical Society on Water Street. Perhaps if I get lucky, I can get Flint, Wheel, and Spring recognized. I want to get it recognized as a historical location in Carriagetown. I can hope that whoever is hearing this would feel in some way to be able to help getting Flint, Wheel, and Spring noticed. If so, I thank you. If not, well, I thank you at least that you're listening to this. And have a good day. So tell me about Good Beans and what you know about the area here.
So I bought the building in November of 1997, and I opened the doors in March of 2000. So it took about 39 months to renovate the building. My understanding, and it's a pretty good understanding, is that this was originally and for the longest time a grocery store. It had several owners. I used to only give it credit to the Failers. The Failers were a family that lived in the area for many years and owned and operated the store for many years. But there were others that owned and operated this space as a grocery store. Um, when I got the building, it was nearly condemned. It had been a storage space for a while for a guy who owned a bar right up on the corner of Grand Traverse and what is now called University. At the time was called Third Avenue. Um, so I and then there were several other businesses in this building aside from grocery stores. And then this anteroom, what I call the anteroom, which is just a side room, was added, and we're not quite sure when. We're suspecting maybe now somewhere in the 40s. And so that was a separate room and had separate businesses in it to this building, a room which has had separate businesses in it. I incorporated it all into one. I repaired everything about this building, brought in the bar, and have been told, and I'm pretty 98, 99% sure it's accurate, that it is the original bar to the Capitol Theater building, and it sat in their basement in 1927. I got the bar from where the Soggy Bottom bar is now, but at the time it was just a vacant side of the building, and on one side. On the other side was Kenjo's Restaurant, a Vietnamese restaurant. I'm not sure its dates of operation. When I took that bar out of there and put it in here and opened, I had a guy about 80 years old come in and tell me that I own the bar to the Capitol Theater building. he was about 80, and that was in the year 2000, which would put him chronologically, age-wise, to be able to make that comment. I've had other people tell me since then that, oh yeah, they remember that bar there, but they're not old enough. So I think a new bar was built upstairs, and that's the bar some people are remembering. But if you remember this bar at that location, today you would have to be about 100 years old. And let's see, March of 2000, I opened the doors. Next March, we begin our 20th year of business. It was a pretty tough place to open a business 20 years ago. And it took quite a long time for some of the changes you see now in the area to happen. I'm happy to be a part of that. I think a part of what the Good Beans Cafe did was begin a stabilization of the neighborhood that other investors down the road and other entities looked at and said, wow, if he can do it, maybe we can. So I'm happy to sort of be that first person on the block, if you will. There were others long before me. I'm not planting a flag. I'm just saying I hung in. I gave true sort of staying power. So.
All right, so the Factory 2 building was originally a Dort Motor Company building. I'm not sure exactly which number, but it was part of the Dort Motor series of plants, and they built cars here, and then they built ambulances for World War I. They shipped them over to England for that war. Since then, the building has been a warehouse for different kinds of cars. DeLorean cars. At one point, the building was entirely full of those. It was a paint warehouse, so a paint wholesaler was here, and I think aluminum siding at one point. So there's been several different businesses over the decades, and then we opened here 2 years ago. So I believe it was 2017 when Factory 2 opened at this location.